Chapter 14 of An Old-Fashioned Girl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeanette Seelig. An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa M. Alcott. Chapter 14. Nipped in the Bud. On the evening of Fan's visit, Polly sat down before her fire with a resolute and thoughtful aspect. She pulled her hair down, turned her skirt back, put her feet on the fender, and took Puddle into her lap, all of which arrangements signified that something very important had got to be thought over and settled. Polly did not soliloquize aloud, as heroines on the stage and in books have a way of doing, but the conversation she held with herself was very much like this. "I'm afraid there is something in it. I've tried to think it's nothing but vanity or imagination, yet I can't help seeing a difference and feeling as if I ought not to pretend that I don't. I know it's considered proper for girls to shut their eyes and let things come to a crisis, no matter how much mischief is done. But I don't think it's doing as we'd be done by, and it seems a great deal more honest to show a man that you don't love him before he has entirely lost his heart." The girls laughed at me when I said so, and they declared it would be a very improper thing to do, but I've observed that they don't hesitate to snub ineligible parties, as they call poor, very young or unpopular men. It's all right then, but when a nice person comes, it's part of the fun to let him go on to the very end, whether the girls care for him or not. The more proposals, the more credit. Fan says Trix always asks when she comes home after the summer excursions, "How many birds have you bagged?" As if men were partridges. What wicked creatures we are, some of us at least. I wonder why such a love of conquest was put into us. Mother says a great deal of it is owing to bad education nowadays, but some girls seem born for the express purpose of making trouble, and would manage to do it if they lived in a howling wilderness. I'm afraid I've got a spice of it, and if I had the chance should be as bad as any of them. I've tried it and liked it, and maybe this is the consequence of that night's fun. Here Polly leaned back and looked up at the little mirror over the chimney-piece, which was hung so that it reflected the faces of those about the fire. In it Polly saw a pair of telltale eyes looking out from a tangle of bright brown hair, cheeks that flushed and dimpled suddenly as the fresh mouth smiled with an expression of conscious power, half proud, half ashamed, and as pretty to see as the coquettish gesture with which she smoothed back her curls and flourished a white hand. For a minute she regarded the pleasant picture, while visions of girlish romances and triumphs danced through her head. Then she shook her hair all over her face and pushed her chair out of range of the mirror, saying with a droll mixture of self-reproach and self-approval in her tone, "Oh, Puddle, Puddle, what a fool I am!" Puss appeared to endorse the sentiment by a loud purr and a graceful wave of her tail, and Polly returned to the subject from which these little vanities had beguiled her. "Just suppose it is true, that he does ask me, and I say yes. What a stir it would make, and what fun it would be to see the faces of the girls when it came out. They all think a great deal of him because he's so hard to please, and almost any of them would feel immensely flattered if he liked them, whether they chose to marry him or not. Trix has tried for years to fascinate him, and he can't bear her, and I'm so glad. What a spiteful thing I am. Well, I can't help it. She does aggravate me so." And Polly gave the cat such a tweak of the ear that Puddle bounced out of her lap in high dudgeon. "It don't do to think of her, and I won't," said Polly to herself, setting her lips with a grim look that was not at all becoming. "What an easy life I should have, plenty of money, quantities of friends, all sorts of pleasures, and no work, no poverty, no cold shoulders or patched boots. I could do so much for all at home. How I should enjoy that!" And Polly let her thoughts revel in the luxurious future her fancy painted. It was a very bright picture, but something seemed amiss with it, for presently she sighed and shook her head, thinking sorrowfully, "Ah, but I don't love him, and I'm afraid I never can as I ought. He's very good and generous and wise and would be kind, I know, but somehow I can't imagine spending my life with him. I'm so afraid I should get tired of him, and then what should I do? Polly Sidney don't sound well, and Mrs. Arthur Sidney don't seem to fit me a bit. Wonder how it would seem to call him Arthur." and Polly said it under her breath with a look over her shoulder to be sure no one heard it. "It's a pretty name, but rather too fine, and I shouldn't dare to say Sid as his sister does. I like short, plain, homelike names, such as Will, Ned, or Tom. No, no, I can never care for him, and it's no use to try." The exclamation broke from Polly as if a sudden trouble had seized her, and laying her head down on her knees, she sat motionless for many minutes. When she looked up, her face wore an expression which no one had ever seen on it before, a look of mingled pain and patience, as if some loss had come to her, and left the bitterness of regret behind. "I won't think of myself, or try to mend one mistake by making another," she said with a heavy sigh. "I'll do what I can for Fan, and not stand between her and a chance of happiness. Let me see, how can I begin? I won't walk with him any more. I'll dodge and go roundabout ways so that we can't meet. I never had much faith in the remarkable coincidence of his always happening home to dinner just as I go to give the Roths their lesson. The fact is, I like to meet him. I am glad to be seen with him, and put on airs, I dare say, like a vain goose as I am. Well, I won't do it any more, and that will spare Fan one affliction. Poor dear, how I must have worried her all this time and never guessed it. She hasn't been quite as kind as ever, but when she got sharp I fancied it was dyspepsia. Oh, me, I wish the other trouble could be cured as easily as this." Here Puss showed an amiable desire to forgive and forget, and Polly took her up, saying aloud, "Puddle, when Missus abuses you, play it's dyspepsia, and don't bear malice, because it's a very trying disease, my dear." Then, going back to her thoughts, she rambled on again. "If he doesn't take that hint, I will give him a stronger one, for I will not have matters come to a crisis, though I can't deny that my wicked vanity strongly tempts me to try and bag a bird just for the excitement and credit of the thing. Polly, I'm ashamed of you. What would your blessed mother say to hear such expressions from you?" "I'd write and tell her all the worry, only it wouldn't do any good, and would only trouble her. I've no right to tell Fan's secrets, and I'm ashamed to tell mine. No, I'll leave mother in peace and fight it out alone. I do think Fan would suit him excellently by and by. He has known her all her life, and has a good influence over her. Love would do so much toward making her what she might be. It's a shame to have the chance lost just because he happens to see me. I should think she'd hate me, but I'll show her that she needn't, and do all I can to help her, for she has been so good to me nothing shall ever make me forget that. It is a delicate and dangerous task, but I guess I can manage it. At any rate I'll try, and have nothing to reproach myself with if things do go contrary." What Polly thought of as she lay back in her chair with her eyes shut and a hopeless look on her face is none of our business, though we might feel a wish to know what caused a tear to gather slowly from time to time under her lashes and roll down on Puddle's Quaker-colored coat. Was it regret for the conquest she relinquished? Was it sympathy for her friend? Or was it an uncontrollable overflow of feeling as she read some sad or tender passage of the little romance which she kept hidden away in her own heart? On Monday Polly began the delicate and dangerous task. Instead of going to her pupils by way of the park and the pleasant streets adjoining, she took a roundabout route through back streets, and thus escaped Mr. Sidney, who, as usual, came home to dinner very early that day, and looked disappointed because he nowhere saw the bright face in the modest bonnet. Polly kept this up for a week, and by carefully avoiding the Shaws' house during calling hours, she saw nothing of Mr. Sidney, who, of course, didn't visit her at Miss Mill's. Minnie happened to be poorly that week, and took no lesson, so Uncle Sid was deprived of his last hope, and looked as if his allowance of sunshine had been suddenly cut off. Now, as Polly was by no means a perfect creature, I am free to confess that the old temptation assailed her more than once that week, for when the first excitement of the dodging reform had subsided, she missed the pleasant little interviews that used to put a certain flavor of romance into her dull, hard-working days. She liked Mr. Sidney very much, for he had always been kind and friendly since the early times when he had treated the little girl with a courtesy which the young woman gratefully remembered. I don't think it was his wealth, accomplishments, or position that most attracted Polly,